Hi, welcome to my latest YouTube video and podcast. Today I'm going to talk to Alex Katehakis, a friend, a colleague, and perhaps one of the smartest women I know in the field of sexual compulsivity and sex addiction. She is a marriage and family therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, and co-founder of the Center of Healthy Sex in Los Angeles. Alex has extensive experience working with a full spectrum of sexuality, from sexual addiction to sex therapy, as well as in problems of sexual desire and sexual dysfunction for individuals and couples. She has successfully facilitated the recovery of many sexually addicted individuals and assisted couples in revitalizing their sex lives. Alex is the real deal. She's a therapist. She's an author. She's an academic. She is a trendsetter. So buckle in and get ready for a really interesting conversation. So, Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thank you, Ross, and thank you for having me. I started treating sex addiction and sexual compulsivity in 1998, and mostly I was interested in human sexuality, what makes for a good long-term committed relationship. How do people keep eroticism alive? So it was human sexuality that interested me the most. But by working with people that were really struggling with sex addiction, love addiction, really sexual codependency for many females, I started to look at that question more deeply, and that had me writing my first book, Erotic Intelligence. Uh, and then in the last 20 years, I've written a number of books on this topic and created the Center for Healthy Sex in Los Angeles.
Most people don't know this, but I used to be a certified sex addiction treatment provider for about 4 or 5 years, and that's how Alex and I met. And so, Alex, um, you were one of the individuals who I've held at high esteem. And what I most appreciated and was fascinated was how you took this, what most people saw as the problem, the disorder, the
Mhm.
addiction, the affliction. And you said, oh, no, 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 no. This is a beautiful, healthy thing that whether you're a sex addict or you are just a person who's just trying to find a way in life to be healthy and live a balanced life personally and relationally, you're able to talk about it that kind of destigmatized the topic and and kind of gave the world permission to explore it. What type of feedback have you received from it?
Well, I mean, that book was really the jumping off point, and it was the
Yeah.
first time that anybody had talked about the difference between, quote, healthy and unhealthy or problematic sex, because the sex addiction model itself did not have a way forward for healthy sexuality. You know, to be fair and true, it wasn't until 2018 when I wrote the workbook Sexual Reflections, which came out of my dissertation, that a sexual health model for sex addiction was actually put into place. I did some research on that question of, what is sexual health for people in recovery from sex addiction?
Right.
I started to look at, sexual behaviors. First of all, there are only so many of them. Or you could say there's a world of them, but sexual acts are fairly limited. And so it's not a matter of the sexual act. Sex is not the problem. It's the abuse of sex that's problematic.
Right.
Any more than food is a problem. Food is not a problem. Food is delicious and lovely and wonderful. But if we abuse it, it can make us sick.
And what I like is how you connected self-love to healthy sexuality. People who are codependent or self-love deficient, sex becomes this force, this joining force that helps them move beyond their biggest insecurities and fears into a new relationship without really getting to know the other person and ultimately themselves. I'd love for you to talk more about the connection between self-love and healthy sexuality.
Well, I mean, I think you really nailed it in your book, Codependency Revolution. You talk about sexually compulsive codependence. And I think that's what you're pointing to is that, early on, a child figures out that if they have sex, then they'll be loved or wanted.
Yeah.
They distort sex with love. They're not the same things at all. And you see this a lot with love addicts as they start having sex with somebody And the sex is way ahead of the relationship. The sex is hot and exciting and intense.
Yeah.
But like you say, they don't know the person at all because they don't know themselves.
Right.
And so it's not really until we know ourselves deeply, asking ourselves tough questions about what do I like? What do I want? Who am I? What's okay for me and what isn't? And what is it that I tolerate that we can possibly be even sexually healthy? So this is actually a very complex and big conversation, because first, people have to heal their sexual codependency or their sex addiction or love addiction before they can even consider the question of my latest workbook
Right.
is called What Turns You On? What really
Hmm.
turns me on? Not what the media says it should be or the person I'm dating says it should be, but what's really true for me. And these are difficult, penetrating questions that we have to excavate on our own or with a therapist or a good workbook, but certainly in a place where we can have these conversations and talk out loud about them. I never answer the question of what is healthy sexuality for anybody. That's really up to each one of us individually to answer that question, because what's healthy for me may be unhealthy for somebody else. So I
Right.
like to think about it as, if I do this, am I in my integrity? Does this feel like a mature, grown up way of being in the world? Or am I acting out my trauma or childish ways of being in the
Mm. Although I don't see the world these days through the point of view of sex addiction, although I support and believe in that very much, and it's a very serious problem. Folks that I work with who are codependent or self-love deficient, they have abandonment issues, and those abandonment issues are related to childhood trauma that I've talked about in my books before. But the sexual relationship is not the primary motivation for the SLD when they meet their partner. And according to the human magnet syndrome, usually is a narcissist. It is through the sexual connection, they feel less prone to be abandoned and therefore feel safer in a relationship that's not healthy. So that the sex in itself is not, unlike the sex addict, is not the primary driving force, but it's almost a pathway to keep them feeling safe and not abandoned.
That's a distinction I would certainly make for, love addicts. I think for people that are sexually codependent, that is a great definition. But there's a confusion there,
Hmm.
again, about sex and love, because I don't really know who I am. I just need sex in order to feel love. That's
Right.
my cue that I actually matter to the other person. But is that other person really making contact with me? Are they in fantasy about somebody else? Do I feel used afterwards? Do I really feel better? And if
Right.
I do, what am I putting up with in order to feel better momentarily? Emotional abuse in the relationship, for example.
Kind of like a stopgap. It's a way to feel safe, feel loved, feel connected, but also a way to keep yourself safe from maybe being abandoned. And that kind of leads me to a next question: is intimacy limited in a narcissistic self-love deficient relationship?
Yes, you can't have intimacy in a narcissistically love deficient relationship, because intimacy begins with ourselves. And
Right.
in my book, Mirror of Intimacy, which is a daily reader for emotional and erotic intelligence, that gets addressed a lot. That self love is just that. It begins with me. How do I
Yeah.
treat myself? And what does it mean to really, we talk about self care a lot, but what does it mean
Right.
to really care for the self?
Right.
How do you wake up in the morning? Do you have a routine for attending to yourself, brushing your teeth, meditating, going for a walk, like waking up to yourself and to the world every morning so you feel grounded and regulated? And then do you eat well? Are you eating nutritious food? Do you take care of
Right.
your physical body? Do you clean up after yourself? Like all these things that if we don't get as children can be very difficult as an adult. And then we expect someone else to do that for us. And that is not, love at all. That
Right.
is, creating emotional hostage situations.
Right.
Until we can really give that love, that nurturing, that care and guidance and protection to ourselves, then we're not going to pick a partner that will treat us in kind. We will pick
Right.
people that treat us the way we treat ourselves.
I remember I thought of a saying which I lifted off of Gandhi: be the change you want to see in the world. The love that you want in others needs to be started with the love you have for yourself.
Mm.
And the idea of the connection between self-love and intimacy and sex. Intimacy is the connection. I really would like for you to expand upon this idea and talk to our viewers and listeners about how someone who's self-love deficient, codependent, how does that impact what we believe is intimacy and how that can be mistaken for sex?
The word intimacy is a euphemism for sex, and that's not what sex is. Sex is love or intimacy in action. It's a merging of the bodies for pleasure and connection. But intimacy is about vulnerability and
Mm-hmm.
honesty. And if you are self-love deficient and you go out with somebody and they treat you poorly or they lie or they are moody, you're constantly making accommodations for them so that you're not abandoned or not wanted. And so all of that pretzeling and twisting is not self-love. It's
Right.
accommodation of the other, and it's toxic. And when
Right.
you are, practicing self-love, you don't make those accommodations. Now, it's one thing if somebody cuts a cantaloupe in a way that you don't like, and so you've got to get over that, right? I'm
Yep.
talking about not the quirks that we all have and the idiosyncrasies we all have, but the levels of respect and
Mm-hmm.
kindness, the levels of vulnerability, and being able to not only ask your partner to be vulnerable, but to be able to tolerate it when they are.
Right.
This historically, after the women's movement, women said they wanted men that were sensitive and open-hearted and kind.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as they started to see men's vulnerability, it made them uncomfortable. It's like, well, I don't want to see you crying, or I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to see you looking
Yeah.
weak.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a mixed message. But to be able to see all of our partners and hold that and protect that is what we want for ourselves also. And that creates a very deep, intimate bond and trust. And
Right.
eroticism and sex comes out of that because the trust is so deep.
Right.
Because if you don't trust somebody, you can't really open up sexually.
If you're a codependent, you're an SLD, the probability is pretty high that your sexual experience makes you feel safer, makes you feel more loved, um, and that you have identified yourself as a pleasing object to a person that wants to be satiated, and that the sex itself is not intimate in the way that we're talking about it, but more of a way to kind of bridge the potential for someone being upset, mad, or not wanting or loving you. And I don't believe you can be intimate when you have to do it in order to not have a consequence or to risk abandonment.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, those are two one-person systems. So everybody's in their own little world. And that, what you just described, is a recapitulation of childhood trauma. So,
Can you talk about that, please?
yeah, I mean, if I'm busy doing everything I do to please the other person, that is my childhood trauma. I had to do
Right.
that in order to accommodate the adults, to make sure I was going to be okay, not hurt, not hit, not loved or abandoned in some ways. And so I
Right.
grow up and I become a people pleaser.
Right.
And I also get really good at tracking what my partner needs sexually, but I have no idea what I want or like. I'm just tolerating it or going along with it to get along. But that's not a mature sexuality. That is
Right.
not an adult woman's sexuality that says, let me think about what actually turns me on. What do I
Yeah.
like? And can we talk about it with each other? So you've got the narcissist who's in their own world,
Right.
taking what they want whenever they want it, and the SLD who's in high accommodation mode.
Yeah.
And that's why I say these are two one-person systems. It's not a two-person system. It's not
Right.
what's going on with you and me. We're not talking to each other, seeing each other, implicitly reading each other's cues. It's just everybody's in their own little dissociative or shut down world.
I used to tell a lot of jokes and stories. I used to, for years, I traveled and gave these seminars and just to keep people awake and interested. And I used to tell this joke that in the beginning was funny and people laughed. And I quit saying it because it just sounded so sad after a while. And it was a codependent has sex with a narcissist. And the codependent says to the narcissist, I can tell sex is really good for you, but how was it for me?
Oh my
And at the
God.
time,
Yeah.
people would laugh because it just happens to be that most people who come to my seminars are
Yeah.
on the codependent or self-love deficient way, and they got it is that the experience of sex is
Mhm.
heightened when they believe their partner has been delighted
Right.
and pleasured, and their experience is them providing that. And if it just happens to be that they enjoyed it too, then that's an extra benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a very sad statement. It also speaks to the codependent's own narcissism,
Yeah,
right?
talk about that because I don't usually use that type of angle.
Well, in
I
a way, it's all about me. Like, was I good enough
Mhm.
for you? Did I get it right for you? See me,
Okay,
see me, love
got
me,
it.
want me, tell me, how fabulous or beautiful I am. I don't have a healthy amount of narcissism myself to know what I do or don't do well.
We're saying the same thing. We're just using words
Yeah.
differently. So self-esteem, self-assurance, self-confidence, or as you would say, narcissism. They need to know that there's something good, and so they are and I think I lifted this from John Bradshaw. Instead of human beings, human doings, and
Yeah.
and that the whole sexual connection or what they believe is intimacy cannot be true intimacy. They are not in that moment believing that they are as worthy as love, respect, and caring and connection as as someone who's receiving and giving. It
Mhm.
is has to be a certain way to feel safe. And a lot of my clients mistake that type of eroticism, that type of sexual compatibility. I mean, that type of sex as compatibility, but it takes them a while to find out that at the end of it all, they're still left pretty empty
Mhm.
and lost in it. I'd like to know your practical approach and how you work with your clients who are, whatever the term you use, codependent, self-love
Mhm.
deficient, how they have either distorted or mistaken understandings of intimacy in which they believe they're getting their cup filled, but yet it's always half filled or they're so thirsty. How do you help them move from this one self-deceptive, self-lying denial point of view to something that's more honest about intimacy and where they're left empty-handed?
Well, I think that's a very long road because what we learn in childhood is how our brains and nervous systems are wired. And it's
Hmm.
difficult for people that are suffering from what I would consider fairly extreme emotional deprivation to start to feel entitled to take up space, to start to even think that they matter or that they can have a voice without being rejected or abandoned.
Right.
Um, so creating, helping people start to create a solid, integrated internal sense of self is a long, slow process that begins with setting boundaries, for example, certainly reading your books,
Mhm.
looking at the kind of toxic relationships they've been in, and also how it served them.
Right.
Because for a lot of people, it prevents them from having to grow up and be their own person in a way because they weren't equipped to do so from the beginning. I find that there's a lot of learned helplessness in this particular population.
Yes.
People that are incredibly capable in the work they do, which is very much a left brain activity. But when it comes to the right brain implicit self, they're still developmentally very, very young and
Right.
very afraid.
When I work with SLDs, I am working with them at the emotional age from which they're stunted. A lot of their preoccupations and ideas about intimacy are really connected to them almost in this childlike, fantasy like idea of making everything perfect so they can be loved.
And the pain of that is no matter how good and perfect they try to be, they still get trammeled on and they can't understand why. Why aren't I
Right.
lovable? Why, did this person cheat on me? Why couldn't they have seen, how much I cared and what a great family we had or our children? They just don't understand why it's being done to them because they don't see that they position themselves as perennial victims or prey because they had such a narcissistic parent to begin
Right.
with. So it's just a constant recapitulation. That's what I was saying before of the trauma
Right.
of choosing the same person over and over again so we can keep working out these issues.
It reminds me about, some of my work that was highly influenced by the work of Alice Miller and the people that followed
Yeah,
her about the connection between the development of SLDD or codependency and the traumatic relationship between a child has with a narcissist.
yeah,
And if a child who can feel safe in her environment by somehow making the insatiably needy narcissistic parent enjoy them, want them, or deciding not to hurt them by molding themselves into that version of a person, they experience what they believe is love. And that is ground zero for what will eventually develop into self-love deficit disorder.
right.
And
And
so,
attracting, a sociopath at times.
yeah, yeah, like, yeah, or someone with a borderline personality disorder or
Yeah,
narcissistic personality disorder, because that is what I call their relationship template. But
yeah. It's like mom and apple pie.
say mom and
It's like
if
mom, home, and apple pie,
yeah. But
right?
yeah, well, yeah, which is just kind of this illusion or delusion that if they can just get it right, they can be what people
Yeah,
think that they should be. When we talk about intimacy, sexuality, and self-love abundance, I keep those discussions at the very end of my treatment program because you cannot move into intimacy if you don't have the foundation of everything else set, healed, worked out. What is the practical approach to get people closer to this healthy intimacy and the reinforcement of self-love abundance?
well, as I said earlier, having a solid long-term relationship with a therapist is crucial because that
Yes.
is an intimate relationship. And so all of our issues play out with our therapist, our people pleasing, our caretaking of them, our, concerns about being seen as a good patient, etc.
Hmm.
So having a safe, trusted other that you can work this out with and through with over years is extremely important. Certainly reading books, like I said, reading your books,
Yeah.
and books that help you start to unravel and understand how your family of origin issues dovetail into what you do today.
Right.
And I think group therapy is enormously helpful for people, whether it's a 12-step program like, CODA, but
Hmm.
really a group, whether it's a women's group, a men's group, a co-ed group, because group therapy is usually about 7 people with a
Right.
facilitator, and all of your issues will play out in that group. There will be people you don't like, people you caretake to, people you wish you could have sex with. It's all right there. And that is a safe forum to start to look at your issues and how you interact with people and how these issues play out. So I think it's kind of a 3-pronged stool in that regard. Individual therapy, group therapy, bibliotherapy, of course, any workshops you can do along the
Right.
way. But it's a full-time job to reconstruct yourself. And I think if people spend like a solid 3 to 5 years in
Right.
therapy doing this work, they will have the kind of life they want to have. But you have to do the work. There's no getting around it.
Yeah. A lot of people ask me, so how long does your program take? It's usually about a year to a year and a half, but there are some people that can do it in 9 months and they go, why so long?
My gosh.
But what I tried to explain is that tremendous negative, harmful, dysfunctional forces have been at play. I mean, have been impacting every element of your SLDD, and that all goes backwards into the point when you were a child. Everything you learned about love and safety and respect and caring and intimacy, it takes a while to get to that, to understand it, and to heal from that. And using resources such as the psychotherapy, the group therapy, are necessary in order to heal the broken world of the child that you used to be, because it's the child who's terrified of being abandoned and will do almost anything, whether possible or not, to make him or her feel safe. If we can just turn that around and help that move forward and heal from that, we have a foundation to teach. And that is why your work, your program, your books are like so invaluable to people needing those opportunities.
Thank you.
Can you tell people a little bit more about how they can find out more about what you do, where your program is?
Mostly we focus here on sex and love addiction and also sex therapy issues and couples therapy. So we have a lot of resources nationwide too.
Right.
And you can find us at centerforhealthysex.com. If people want to write to me directly, it's Alex at centerforhealthysex.com. And all the information, the phone number and everything is on our website there. And again, we have a lot of resources nationwide. We're in California. So if you're out of state, we can help you find a therapist in your state. We can, give you as much information and help as we can.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. But if the listeners or viewers are interested in more about this, her contact information will be listed. Thank you, Alex, for being a part of this. And it's so nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for having me.